Okay, the next step is about personalizing this so it reflects you in some format. Because remember, this is a graphic on top of your portfolio at the very beginning is the introductory page, the introductory banner. So it should reference you in some fashion. So I'm going to have a little bit of fun with this. I'm going to put in an image of, let's see here, file, open in place, Mr. Bean, because I grew up with him and I thought he was hilarious. So let's have some fun with this. So here's a funny image. When you're taking an image of yourself, if you're putting your face on here, um, you'll probably have some kind of background behind you. It won't be a perfect white background to make easy selections. So that's why I chose something where it's a little bit busier. Okay, in this image, we're going to select him so that you can't see all of this. We just want Mr. Bean in the image. So if you go over here, you've got these different selection tools. By default, the magic wand is on the top. If you hold the arrow key down, you have the option of quick selection and object selection. If your background is simple enough, the object selection tool will work really well. The magic wand tool is a bit challenging to work with because it selects based on a range of attributes like color, hues, patterns, and so on. So if I were to click on this region here, I'm getting quite a lot because the tolerance is 50. So if I'm going to quickly zoom in here just to show you. It's grabbing so much. It's grabbing Mr. Bean's collar, his skin. It's a bit of a mess. If I were to work with that, he'd have holes in his body, so that wouldn't work. If I lower the tolerance to say 16 and there we go, come on. As you can see, it doesn't grab enough. If I were to increase that to 30, it's a little bit more, but it's not great. One way you can select more is just to hold shift and click on different regions, but it's still not ideal. It's a little bit of extra work. So I'll say select, deselect to remove my selection. I'm going to try another option here. So let's click on that arrow again. I like the idea of using the object selection. So I'm going to click on that, select subject. Okay, they want money for that. Okay, so let's see if this works. I'll select Mr. Bean and see if it can find his outline. So it looks pretty good. There's a zoom tool here. I like keyboard shortcuts, but you can click on the zoom tool here to move in. I'm just going to use the spacebar key and command on a Mac. And you can see the little marching ants that represents the selection around his head and so forth. It's not bad, but there's this region here that's not very good. I'm going to precisely clean that up because even if I were to bring in the magic wand tool, it would look really messy. And as you can see, part of his eyebrow was grabbed and that shouldn't have happened. So we're going to look over here, and at the bottom, there's something called a quick mask mode. And what the quick mask mode does is allows you to go into an editing space where you can adjust your selection. So I click on that. Anything in red indicates it's masked, and anything that's not red is exposed. So what we want to do is make sure that this is black and white. Black means masked, white means exposed. And we take the paintbrush, and then you can lower the size up here as well. I just used the keyboard shortcut, square brackets. Maybe reduce the hardness. And you can clean that up very carefully. Now, part of his eyebrow has been covered, which doesn't work. So let's switch the value here with that double-headed arrow. You can click on it and changes it. Or if you're working, you like to work quickly, just press X and it does it for you. So now I want to expose this eyebrow here. And it's also a little bit rough looking around the skin here. I'm just going to smooth this out. Okay. It's pretty good. You can go in there with a smaller brush and get really, really precise, but I'm happy with this. So once you're done, you click on this quick mask mode button again, to get out of there, or you press Q. So Q is a quick way to go in and out. Now I have my selection, but if you zoom in, you'll notice that it's a little bit rough around some of the edges. So if you go into the selection tool region, any one of these will bring up this command. And you look at the top, you have the option of refine edge. So click on that. And it has a default value of 3. Now what that does is it kind of smooths the area on the very edge here of what's selected. And it gives it a lot more of a realistic selection. You don't have the hard lines. This is really important when you're working around hair as well. And of course, if you were to increase this, it would be even larger, but I don't need it that dramatic. I just need a subtle fix. So I hit OK. And now you can see that it's nicely clean and he's been removed from his background on this layer. Now, what it does is it turns off the original layer so that you don't destroy that, and it creates a new layer above. So not only does it clean up your selection, but it creates the new layer for you, which is a beautiful thing. And as you can see, I still have the little bits of hair here, so it's a lot more realistic. Now what I want to do is put Mr. Bean in my circle here. So you could do that, which works as well. It actually has kind of an interesting style. Or you can put him in a space that is circular, like this. So if I were to click on this layer, layer 1, which by the way, we forgot to name. So I'll just double click on that and call it yellow circle. Always remember to name your layers. You'll see this blue outline. If I go under paths, I can turn that into a selection or a path. So I'm going to turn into selection. So now I've got those little marching ants again. It looks like the selection I had around Mr. Bean. And I'm going to go up to the Mr. Bean portrait layer and scroll down to this icon. It looks a lot like the quick mask mode one, but this one's called adding a raster mask. And what that does is it creates a cutout without destroying any of the image around the edges. So what it's done is it's masked out any of the area you don't want in the picture. If I wanted some of that brought back, you can always go back to your paintbrush with the white and the black selected. And if you're in the mask mode, let's increase the brush size. You click on here, it'll bring it back. But I don't want to do that. I want to keep him in the circle. From here, you can play around a little bit more with your portrait, or Mr. Bean in this case, by adding some effects. So we move our mouse down to the bottom here. And perhaps I want to add a drop shadow. So it creates an interesting effect here. Maybe I want to lighten that up a bit. Tuck it in, it's not so far. Oh, I don't know, it adds a neat effect when it's farther out. So play around with that, see if you like that. And there's another feature here in the layers panel that you might find interesting to play around with, and it's the layer styles palette. So if I were to click on this panel comes up, and we have all these different options for blending layers together. So if I were to pick multiply, I see the greens and the patterns coming through Mr. Bean. He's become translucent. I don't like that, but there's different options that you can play around with. Lighten will make him almost look like a ghost. Overlay, somewhere in the middle. So you can play around with these and see if you get a nice effect where it has an interesting overall feel with the design you're going for with your particular design. Difference, it's a little wild, exclusion, so on. So just for, making the change, having some fun, I'll just do an overlay here. And now I want to add text. Well, I think when you're introducing your portfolio, it's important that you have your name, of course. And there's different ways to do that. So I can grab the text tool on the side here, select a font. So find something ideally fairly contemporary and maybe represents you in an interesting fashion. There's a lot to pick from. So certain fonts say certain things that don't match. I mean, this looks like a Halloween style font. This is just hard to read. This looks really spooky as well. This looks very old fashioned. So pay attention to what it implies. If you look at it, what do you think of? Do you think of your favorite commercial? There's all sorts of different types of fonts that represent different eras, and this one, for instance, has this very IT feel, like maybe a space movie type thing. So play around, find something that's suitable, appropriate. This could take you a long time, by the way, and I don't want to take up your time searching, so I'm just going to grab something fairly neutral. What's neutral? Just a sans serif font. Oh dear. There's not a lot of, they all have something a little peculiar about it. Okay, I'll do something more elegant. Let's do this. Okay, so if I were to click in this region here and start typing, yes, it's fine. I'm going to select it all and then change the font to, say, 50. It's fine, but it's not really saying much. You know, I just typed some letters there. It's just very safe. You can have a lot more fun with it. I'm thinking it might be interesting to have our type run along a path. So I'm going to go back to the circle shape here. I'm changing this to path from shape, and I'm going to trace the outline of the circle. So hold shift to keep your proportions, and then very carefully line it up to the outside of Mr. Bean's circle here. Remember, spacebar allows you to move it around and line up. So that looks good. I like the font style I've chosen. The font size is suitable. So I'm going to go ahead and place my text. I think I want it somewhere about there. Keep in mind the length of the name. If you have a long name, start down here. His name's a bit shorter. Maybe I'll click somewhere in the middle so it's centered. So I'm going to click here and type Mr. Bean. Now, once you've committed to that starting point, you can't change it. You can move it forward, but you can never move it back. So if you've made a mistake and you don't like where you started, you just say edit, step backward or undo, and repeat the process again. So there's my text. Think about color. Once again, you can add effects if you like. If you have the type of font that lends itself well to a drop shadow, for instance, or an outline. Generally, I find it gets messy, so I tend to avoid that. You also want to provide some other information about what it is this is for. Your portfolio. So let's this time maybe have the text straight. So we click over here, portfolio. And as you can see, the text is way too big for the space that we have. So I'll select everything, Command A on a Mac, or you can just grab your mouse and select it. And let's reduce the size of the font. So let's bring that to about a 30. That's a little too small. 50. Grab your move tool and position it. If you're getting that double arrow, it means you're a little too far out, so you might have to zoom in. Portfolio. Okay. And then perhaps we want to say exploring technology. So let's type that down here. And I want to work with the curvature of the circle. So I'm just going to indent that a little bit so I can tuck it in. And it's too big. So one way you can shrink it is either change the font like I did, or just grab the corner. Oops. Oh, it's the path. Okay, so let's create a selection and get rid of this path. When you have that blue line getting in the way, go down to here, turn it into a selection, go up to select and say deselect or Command D on a Mac. And now that won't interfere with what you're doing on your text layer. So you can now resize without being disrupted. Now, as you can see, this white text is disappearing. So in this case, you might want to change your font color. So let's maybe go with like a bluish gray, or you can just play around with whatever you like. Okay, so this has a very old worldly appearance to it, but you can get the idea of how this would all come together. Keep it relatively simple but effective. Maybe you want to bring in some imagery of the work like that you've done in this semester. Clean out the background and have it sort of in the background here, almost like a wallpaper design. So you can play around with that if you want. Your paper airplanes, maybe they're flying around in the back, or maybe your rockets here, and so on. Whatever you think looks stylistically appropriate. Once you're happy with your design and you think you've completed everything, it's time to save. And this is something that you actually should be doing as you're working forward, just in case you lose your work. Photopea is notorious for suddenly crashing. It's a browser-based program. It's not perfect. So it's a good habit to get into every once in a while. It does not automatically save. You have to go to File, Save as PSD. Place it somewhere where you can find it. It might be your student drive. It might be on the desktop. And then you hit save. I'm going to replace it. Now I'm ready to sign out. But if you're looking to put this image into Google Sites or Google Slides or PowerPoint, it needs to be in a JPEG format or a PNG format or some other type of format. PSD is not recognized. So in that case, you go File, Export as JPEG. Maximize the quality, keep the dimensions the same, and hit save. Before wrapping this up, it's important that I note the difference between a PSD file and a JPEG file. The PSD file is really important to have because it retains all the layers and the effects and any work you've done in Photopea. It allows you to go back into the program and make alterations or adjustments as necessary. The JPEG file is a flattened version of this. There are no layers. You can't make any further adjustments. The text is no longer text. It's been converted into an image. So that is the difference, and that's why it's important that you do have that PSD file.